We're back with Stephen Peck. He's talking to us about evolution, science, faith, religion, and Latter-day Saints. Stephen is a professor at Brigham Young University. Thanks for joining us
Oh,
again,
you're
Steve.
welcome. I'm glad to be here. It's my favorite subject.
Yeah, excellent. In the last episode, we talked a little bit about evolution, and I want to shift that over into some of the religious implications of that. Latter-day Saints have long praised the blessings of science, as you well know. We've had some great
Yeah.
LDS scientists in the past. We have, we praise a lot of the medical advances, a lot of the technological developments that have occurred. The church makes use of with the internet and with vaccinations and helping with that sort of thing. So the church makes use of a lot of products of science and scientific research, but the relationship hasn't always been particularly cozy, particularly on the subject of evolution. And there was a 2009 Pew Forum survey which asked respondents if evolution was the best explanation for human life on Earth or for the origins of human life. And they discovered that the general American public is evenly divided on it. They say about 48% said that it's the best explanation, and about 45% rejected that position. So what's more interesting to us particularly, though, and this is pretty striking, according to their survey, with all the problems that surveys might have, only 22% of Mormons told the Pew Forum that evolution was the best explanation for human life. So 3 out of 4 Mormons that they spoke with disagreed with that. In fact, only Jehovah's Witnesses rank lower than us at 90%. So according to your understanding of church doctrine and church teachings, what do you make of those statistics?
Yeah, it's disappointing if accurate. People have pointed out and been people thinking about this. They point out that the wording's kind of bad in that best explanation depends on if you're talking about proximate explanation or ultimate explanation. If Latter-day Saints are reading that as why humans are here, they would be disinclined to agree with the statement. Um, but even given all that, my own experience is that may not be far away from what most Latter-day Saints think. On my mission, all us missionaries, you know, grew up in an atmosphere where evolution was considered, frankly, evil. And in fact, I can remember telling a guy he couldn't be baptized unless he quit believing in it. And this was an underlying assumption of all the wards I'd gone to. I find it widespread. So even given the problems, I don't know what the actual statistic is, but 22% does not really surprise me. I mean, you find wards from places, where it's filled with, people who have graduate degrees. Um, that figure goes way, way up. But I think in the general church population, that might not be inaccurate. And if it is, I think it's unfortunate because really there is nothing about our doctrine that should be threatened by evolution to the extent that you seem to see it. And just in fact, uh, my children continue to get anti-evolutionary messages in seminary, and it causes them confusion. And it causes people of faith great confusion when a student uh, grows up in this atmosphere, and when they go to BYU, they're taught right about evolution. But you can imagine, and I know,
You mean in the school of biology
right,
particularly, right?
right, and especially when you get into college. And I mean, I speak from great experience in knowing people who have felt like they had to make a choice between religion or science. And make no mistake, that's the choice if you deny evolution. The scientific story of evolution is so striking. When you get into college, a student arrives at say, a secular university, and they're presented with the enormity of the evidence for evolution, and they've come to really believe that they now have to make a choice between science and religion. We lose a lot of people. We lose a lot of students because they feel like that that there's a dichotomy here that they've grown up with. And if evolution's true, then the church must not be true. Or if the church is true, then evolution will not be true. And so there's actually two reactions. One is to hold on to the church, but then become anti-science and hold these huge suspicions of science that you see all over the place in the church and that still get talked about, that you cannot hold on to both. And I disagree with that so vehemently. That choice never has to be made. The two both are ways of knowing, as Elder Scott says. They're both beautiful and bring us important truths about the nature of the universe, both our place in it and the way that it works. And it's just a shame that this mythology, that the two are incompatible, is so entrenched in LDS culture. And I mean that word, I'm choosing that word deliberately because I think it's cultural, not doctrinal. And yet there are people who want to conflate that. You find blogs all over the place where people say you have to make a choice. Evolution's evil. There was no death before the fall. We have to destroy we have to destroy all science that suggests that the story might be more complex. And there's a good number of people that get misled by these people who think they're doing good, but I think they are responsible for great harm in the church.
And the hard thing is, I mean, if we look historically, it's very simple. I'm on the Fair website. I'm going to post some links to some articles that talk about the historical circumstances about the church leaders' responses to evolution. Yeah. And what you see early on is there was a first presidency statement early on by Joseph F. Smith in his first presidency when they said that Adam is the primal parent of our race. That was the quote that they used. And then the controversy arose because individuals such as B.H. Roberts and James E. Talmage and others were seeking a way to reconcile evolutionary theory with church scripture. And then you had Joseph Fielding Smith, on the other hand, and who was the most vocal, who felt that evolutionary theory would basically override the truthfulness of the gospel, right, sort of thing. And Joseph F. Smith felt that if we evolved from if there was death before the fall, that means that there was no fall, which means that there's no need for Christ, which means that there's no need for an atonement, which means that there's no eternal life, and that, that sort of thing. And so it slips into this. Right. And so that's where the dichotomy was set up. But what's unfortunate is Joseph Fielding Smith was able to put his perspective into a few books and into a few church talks. And B.H. Roberts' particular book wasn't ultimately published. He was going to put a book out called The Truth, the Way, and the Life, and which, it had its own scientific problems, to be sure. It's quite outdated today. But
exactly. He talks in terms of pre-Adamites and
but that sort of set things up for by the time the first presidency tried to call a truce, and they did this in about 1931, they said, and this is a very interesting way that they put this, because this big controversy they'd been facing for several years between, is the church going to promote evolution? Is the church going to deny evolution? What is the church going to do? And the church decided not to do really either of those things. In fact, President Grant said, leave geology, biology, archaeology, and those sort of things to scientific research while we magnify our calling in the realm of the church. And one thing we agree on is that Adam's the primal parent of our race. Right. So they held to a literal Adam, but at the same time they said, let science work its way out. We're not going to say Latter-day Saints can't believe in evolution. In fact, they didn't do that at all. And as you said, at Brigham Young University, they have probably one of the premier biology departments in the country. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. In fact, the Department of Biology could be better named the Department of Evolutionary and Ecological Sciences. I mean, BYU has a tremendous reputation for evolutionary ecology. Almost everyone in the department is doing an active research program in evolutionary ecology. I'm trying to think of an exception, and I can't think of anyone. This is BYU's strength. In fact, Alan Templeton is one of the leaders in evolutionary studies. He was interviewed during the monkey trials in Pennsylvania. And he said, well, if you want to see people who do religion and science right, look to Brigham Young University. And he's basing that solely on our reputation for science. He doesn't know what we're doing religiously, but he does know that
Right.
scientifically we are a strong and active participant in evolutionary research. In fact, it cracks me up. One woman on my blog was arguing with somebody about evolution, and she said, if evolution were true, they'd teach it at Brigham Young University. And I really got a kick out of that because it is a premier evolutionary ecology program, and yet it is also a premier. Our students are faithful, and our faculty is. The two go hand in hand. I can't emphasize that enough. That evolution is no threat to our beliefs. It takes some readjustment. I won't deny that. You can't hold to, about the time that Joseph Fielding Smith was writing, there was a lot of the same views that creationist evangelical Christianity held, like a young earth. All these kinds of things were very, very typically held. And that viewpoint sort of leaked into a lot of people's minds about our doctrine. And in fact, Joseph Fielding Smith, compared it to the same being that influenced Cain in the Garden of Eden, whispered to Darwin,
Yeah.
some really harsh statements. I mean,
That's why I can sympathize with some of these members of the church who, in online discussions and things, are so adamant that,
absolutely.
against it. I mean, they have plenty to draw on as far as a lot of the things that President Smith, well, prior to being president, I should clarify, a lot of the things
Yes, and that's an important point.
yeah, uh,
Once he became prophet, he never spoke on evolution again. It's really interesting.
yeah.
He became completely silent about it, and I think that is one of the hallmarks that we need to look to. Interestingly, David O. McKay, as prophet, continued to speak very favorably about evolution.
Right.
Never going so far as to say, this is the way God did it, but he uses evolution as an example of progress in science in one talk. It's unfortunate that it unfolded that
Well, then
way.
we have other Latter-day
And
Saint thinkers who didn't think that way. I mean, so who are
exactly.
some of them? There were general authorities who spoke in positive ways about evolution, right?
Right. I mean, James Talmage, and you have to remember too. I mean, the people who want to dismiss evolution go back and they see that B.H. Roberts and James Talmage are kind of milk
Yeah,
toast in their embracing of
they are.
Darwinian evolution. The thing is, though, is that it wasn't until the 30s actually that that Darwin's idea of evolution through natural selection gained the purchase necessary. And it went through this big nadir right at the turn of the century and down, where evolution through natural selection scientifically was losing ground. And the reason was there was no mechanism, all the way people thought that inheritance occurred. I mentioned that inheritance
Uh-huh.
is a
It's one
huge
of the
part
three big things you said.
exactly. Well, there was no mechanism. Nobody, and all of the mechanisms that people speculated about at the time held to a kind of a blending inheritance where you kind of blend the characteristics of parents. And that ruins evolution. If it is blending, it's gone. And because it gets watered down to nothing in the long term. It wasn't a very strong, their milquetoast expressions of evolution are in fact reflective of the milquetoast expressions of evolution in the scientific community. Nobody really doubted evolution per se. I mean, the evidence from the fossil record was convincing enough that
Right.
species change. But we didn't have the Darwinian mechanism in place until
That's when
the
genes and things
1930s
like that
when
were, right?
yeah, Mendel was rediscovered, and all of a sudden, particulate inheritance of evolution had a mechanism, and then the evidence started accruing, and it's just
That's
snowballed
really interesting.
since
I mean,
then.
because that's
And
about when the first presidency said we're going to leave this to scientific research, which, ironically enough, was about the time
right,
when neo-Darwinism or new views of evolution really
right,
started to take off. So we're left with with I think an unfortunate legacy where people might emphasize things that perhaps Joseph Fielding Smith said, because they believe in
Right.
prophets, and so we should rely on the things that they say. But they overlook the fact that we also had other prophets, seers, and revelators, so to speak, James Talmage and John Whitsoe and others, who
Right.
took a different position on it, and so that's a completely valid thing for Latter Day Saints today.
And the church itself has never made any more statements than the ones they've made. The church, as the church, has never. I mean, there are obviously examples of people who did not believe in evolution, and these get thrown up all the time. I mean, you can line up quotes from people who didn't believe in evolution all the day long. Um, but that was their opinion, and they're really drawing on kind of the cultural influences that were prevalent at the time, where evolution and religion were seen as harmful to each other. You had big debates like the monkey trials, and this continues. You continue to see that there was a lot of rhetoric coming from especially evangelical Christianity that evolution was evil. And there was just, there were lots of sources to read about this, and unfortunately,
Right.
those
What's
crept
interesting is
into our discourse,
right.
but not the church's discourse. The individual members of the church in high positions, though, had an opinion about evolution that given that if there wasn't this big battle going on in America about it, probably never would have appeared in the church at all. And
That's what's interesting with
isn't
Joseph Fielding Smith
isn't
is that
there?
he wasn't claiming to have received revelation on any of this. He was actually relying on non-Mormon sources on evolution, right?
The primary person was a Seventh Day Adventist guy named George McCready Price. He was a PhD trained geologist who was his big thing was flood geology, and where do we find the evidence of the flood in the fossil record? But he was a huge influence on Joseph Fielding Smith, and his work sort of gets incorporated into his writing, quite readily. And so that's interesting. Yeah, he wasn't drawing on revelation; he was drawing on
And
Seventh Day
Seventh Day Adventist
Adventist arguments.
scriptural interpretation as well. I would say, right? I mean, so
Exactly,
here's the
exactly.
issue with that, though. I mean, and we've touched on it a little bit. Is the slippery slope argument can enter into the discussion where if Mormon apostles have been wrong on things like the global nature of Noah's flood or the age of the earth or on the accuracy of evolutionary theory, if they've been wrong about that, how can they be trustworthy on other issues? And I mean, that's a question that a lot of people have asked. If we can't trust LDS leaders on that issue, why should we trust them on other issues? And what would you respond to that?
I think this brings up an important thing that we really don't talk about very often. General authorities are human, and they have opinions. They have opinions about things that are current in the scientific world. I was thinking about Elder Scott's talk. He mentions in that talk quarks, and I was picturing sort of these no death people way in the future, and maybe
Like ether
quarks
is, right?
become passe. Right, they get rewritten and incorporated in new ways and into scientific description of subatomic particles. Say string theory pops out. So you can imagine these future no death before the Paul saying in a general conference, Elder Scott mentioned quarks. Therefore, they exist. Therefore, our current science has gone astray. They're saying that there are no quarks when we know from a general authority that there are quarks. And that's not Elder Scott's point at all. He's talking about knowing the truth. And he's not making committed statements that quarks exist. He's making a statement about how we find truth. But they get misread like this a lot, and their opinions about science and scientific controversies are going to be culturally contextualized. They're going to be based on their understanding, and we don't believe in infallibility. But the church makes statements. There are official church positions that are usually very, very clear, read in general conference, voted on. There's a difference between opinions, and I think following general authority opinions, whether it's about science or the taste and the proper color of tie, or hairstyle, becomes a silly exercise. Where they speak about the gospel and give revelations, I think it's important. I mean, there's a great statement, I think, of humility and Power by Elder McConkie, when the revelation that the priesthood should be extended to all worthy males. He says, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but it's something along the lines of, forget everything we said, forget everything we wrote. We spoke without the light and knowledge that has just been revealed to the world. That's a tremendous statement of faith and of humility, and the recognition that new revelations trump old revelations, and that things we may have spoken, the way we may have understood the world previously, is not the way we understand the world now. And we have to allow this kind of change as members of the church. I mean, one of the things we continually believe is in continuing revelation, and we really need to take that seriously. That maybe there are things that are going to change, especially perspectives, as we gain more and more knowledge from science and other sources in the natural world. It's quite likely that we are going to have to revise the way we understand things, understand the scriptures, understand the world. But we can do that. I mean, it's not outside of the realm of our theology. We're not locked into particular interpretations of the scriptures. We're locked into revelation. And so where I see the problem is when people take statements from general authorities that are clearly based on their opinion. I mean, Joseph Fielding Smith's book, Man, His Origin, and His Destiny, David O. McKay hated the book. There's clear evidence he was angry that it was published.
Right, but part of the problem is that I don't know that the church ever publicized things like that opposed the view expressed by Joseph Fielding Smith, which is what I wanted to ask you about as far as how you would approach that survey, which suggests that only 22% of Mormons say that it's the best, the evolution is the best explanation. So if there's a pretty widespread anti-evolutionary feeling within the church, do you think it's something that can only be overturned by a statement over in general conference, or maybe a change in church manuals? Or do you see the church taking an approach to it as where they're saying they're just going to let it atrophy? I think over time, younger people coming up in the church will be much more willing to accept the idea of evolution. But then there are also people who right now are falling through the cracks and leaving the church because so I mean, what do you say about as far as addressing it is concerned?
Well, and I think the church is in an awkward position. I mean, I think if they start to speak about scientific matters, it kind of promotes the kind of confusions that have occurred. And so I think that the statement you read is beautiful. Leave geology, biology, archaeology, and anthropology to the scientists. And there has to be some theological heavy lifting. And I like President Hinckley's statement. He got asked about some theological point. He said, "I leave that to the professors." And so I think it's appropriate to wrestle with these things. But I'm not sure the church should, declare by fiat that evolution is true. There is that 1% chance I talked about. The Catholic Church put out a very friendly statement to evolution, and everybody, was on board. But I think the best approach is to create an environment where the science can be held in a friendly way. That not make statements about evolution, but people who do believe in evolution create a space where it's okay to believe in evolution, and not like the sort of hardcore no death before the fall people
Right.
who insist on you choose. There's a choice to be made here. You can choose light, darkness, and those that choose darkness will be damned in hell. I had a religion professor tell me at BYU that I won't name names, but when I was here, he told me that I was going to hell because I believe in evolution. And when he said it, he didn't mean a nice Mormon hell. I could tell he was referring to a good Baptist hell.
Yeah.
Mormon hells are fine until you really need somebody to get it. And we want to have a good fire and brimstone experience for these evolutionary believers. But you can imagine, as an undergraduate, what that did to my perception of faith and science. And thank goodness I had a good and wise bishop that I brought my concerns to. And he said, Brother Peck, don't worry about this. Don't worry about that. You read the scriptures as you read them, and it's going to be okay. And it was the best advice he could have given. if I would have put a lot of stock into, I've got to make a choice here now, it would have been disastrous.
Right, you probably wouldn't be on the podcast right now. Yeah.
All right, probably not.
It'd be nice if the church would just release
Right.
this huge statement that declared evolution to be acceptable or right or whatever. But at the same time, that's just the sort of thing that got the church in trouble in the past, or that got certain church leaders in trouble in the past.
Right, and I think the right approach is to leave this to the scientists and let it sort it out and create a space. And even Joseph Fielding Smith, there's a great. I wish I could find the source for this. I can't find it. Maybe somebody else can dig it out for me and send it to me. But he also,
Right.
and I've got his writings on this, believed that men would never reach the moon, that the sphere of the earth was our domain, and that it would be impossible. So, they go to the moon, and he gets challenged on it. Oh, you said nobody would ever go to the moon. And he just shrugs and says, that's wrong. I think he's probably doing the same thing about evolution. Well, whoops, and
Right.
that doesn't remove his writings
Right.
on Christ and atonement and these kinds of things, the things that he was commissioned to speak on, and so it doesn't bother me at all that leaders in the church held opinions which turned out to be wrong. I think Brother McConkey's humility at the change of priesthood status is a good model for how to approach that things change, and we don't need to hold on to doctrines and dogmas.
Right, and I think the fact that the different church leaders have had different perspectives on these things is a good indication that that church members can as well. And I bring that up in the context of Adam, of the idea of a historical Adam, a biological ancestor named Adam. So basically, that an argument that a lot of Latter-day Saints have heard is the idea that if there's no historical figure called Adam, that there would be no fall of Adam, then there would be no need for an atonement, and thus no need for Jesus. And so let's talk about the historical Adam, or idea of historic Adam, in Latter-day Saint thought. There's other Christians today who have reconciled evolution by positing that Adam is not a historical figure, but is an allegorical figure or a mythological figure. But Latter-day Saints generally believe that he was a real historical person. What are your thoughts on this?
I think the important thing to keep in mind about Adam is that for Latter-day Saints, especially, there are rather easy answers, because we define the first man as the first event where a spirit child of God was placed in a body. We have a very keen sense that what makes us unique as humans isn't just the physical shape of our body or the way that we look, but that in fact that we have a spirit that we believe is a child or an offspring of God in some sense. And I don't have a really good sense of what that means, whether it's biological or by some other means, but whatever it is, there's a parental relationship between us and God. And Adam is the first of that kind of thing to happen. So I don't think it's necessary to throw out Adam, as I've seen done in other places, other Christian religions, just because of the way we define Adam as the first man, meaning the first time a spirit child of God was placed in a body.
So do you think there's room in Latter-day Saint thought for a mythological view of Adam, or do you think that it's more sound generally to sort of posit a stopgap Adam, sort of like you talked about?
I actually think we need room for both, in a sense. I mean, I think we have this very clear from science picture of the way life has evolved on Earth. We have a very clear picture of hominin, as we call it, evolution. Some of the best fossils we have are human fossils. There's absolutely scientifically no way to deny that there has been a long history of human habitation. And we as Latter-day Saints also have some very interesting wording about Adam being figurative. And so I'm more interested that we allow the diversity of thought in this. I mean, that some people may believe that Adam was the first spirit child of God, or maybe that he's figurative. my personal feeling is that we need room for both. And in fact, I don't really see any revelation that denies or supports either interpretation. I see the idea of Adam is important because we have a doctrine of the fall and something happened. But what that means, I don't think we need to pin down that we can. I think we can sort of hold the possibilities of both views. So
One
maybe
thing,
that's wishy-washy, but I really am interested in diversity of thought within the church.
one thing that someone might bring up as a response to that is the idea of death before the fall of Adam,
Right,
death on earth. And so I think that
right.
was one of the points that Elder McConkie talked about quite a bit. And so your view would sort of contradict that, and because the Book of Mormon talks a little bit about death entering the world through Adam. I think
Right.
New Testament does. The Old Testament has some scriptures on that, but is it a case where we're reading present assumptions back onto the scriptural text, or how do you reconcile that?
Well, I think so. I think that as a matter of fact, we see rich fossils, unless we're pushing back Adam to the Cambrian or something. I think the evidence is really clear that there were things that have lived on this planet a long time that lived and died, that ate and did all of those kinds of things. But I don't see that as a threat. I mean, when we understand there's no death before the fall, there's lots of ways that could be interpreted. It could be interpreted, and these are just several ways that people have pointed out. It could be that maybe that these were just biological machines up to the point where the earth was ready for a spiritual emanation to infuse it, or maybe no death before the fall really does refer back to it brings in, I think, the idea of the atonement. Maybe it was impossible to sin, and the death that they're talking about isn't necessarily a physical death. And so the fact that there are a few end runs suggests to me that maybe there are others, and maybe we just don't understand it enough. And these are things that would have to be revealed. But I don't think it's necessary that we hold this view. And in fact, I think the view that demands that there is no death before the fall is ultimately very harmful. I mean, it's very harmful, I think, to see the people that write this way and the people who have sort of made their living proclaiming no death before the fall, and any other viewpoints means you're in a state of apostasy, I think is really harmful, because we have students going out and attending other universities, and they're all of a sudden confronted with believe there was no death before 6,000 years ago, or you can't be a Mormon anymore. I mean, and that's the impression they leave. I really am discouraged by that kind of rhetoric that makes people choose between religion and science, when I don't think such a choice is necessary.
Okay. Another question that comes up in the context of evolution and religion is the idea of natural evil. And the other night I was driving home from school, and it was dark out, and in the middle of the road I saw a raccoon, and it had been hit by a car, and it was still alive, and it was just struggling on the ground and sort of trying to roll over, and I saw him whipping his tail around, and it all happened so fast. He was in the middle of the road, and I sort of wished I could have maybe hit him myself, and
Put him out of his misery.
yeah, and it just made me feel horrible that there was this little creature that was suffering there in the road, and that's quite minuscule on the scale of suffering and death and things that have happened over how long would you put back the first organisms that could feel pain like that? I mean,
old, Cambrian probably. Where the first neurology is starting to show up, and
yeah. So I mean, that's a
it's been around.
long history. So people say if God creates that way, then He's really inefficient and also not very merciful either, because there's a lot of suffering. Have you thought a lot about that issue?
I have, and in fact, what's interesting to me is that an evolutionary viewpoint or an evolutionary theology actually gets around that a bit. And it comes from, I think, a very Mormon perception or a very Mormon idea that God is not this, omnipotent God of the Neoplatonist view of God, where God created everything ex nihilo, or I'm not saying that right.
Yeah, I don't know how to
You know
pronounce
what
the
I mean?
X from nothing.
Yeah, from nothing. And an all-powerful God that has no limits. And if you posit that kind of God, then wow, natural evil really is a painful idea, because it means God just created all these creatures to suffer.
Right, that's what Darwin said, right? He said the devil's cleric or whatever could write quite the
Right.
history of life.
Right, and he wrote a letter explaining that he really had difficulties with an idea of a God who could create an ignomoniid wasp that would lay its larvae in another creature's body and let them essentially eat it alive. And natural evil is really, really difficult to explain, because it is, as you saw it with the raccoon, immensely obvious.
Yeah,
I was watching a movie or a television documentary
yeah.
about
This was
a
the
lion.
lion, right? Yeah, you
Yeah,
mentioned that in the last episode.
yeah, yeah. Right. So, what's interesting to me about a Mormon theology is that we don't have the same omnipotent God who created ex nihilo, or from nothing, uh, and so our God, we believe, uses natural law, in a sense, laws that are in place. I mean,
Right. A lot of
this,
Christians would say that that's almost blasphemous to say that
yeah.
God's almost constrained by law. And do you think that would you say God's a product of law, or that he? How would you How would you?
Well, I think from the Mormon perspective, in a sense, we believe in an embodied God, which implies that embodiment must mean something,
Right.
which must mean that if it means something, if it means that there are causal effects that are brought about the body, or that are used in the body, to speak really wildly and loosely, a heavenly biology. I have no idea what that might mean, but
Right.
but this idea, I think, is very important, that we really we have scriptures that talk about God ceasing to be God under certain conditions,
Hmm.
if he acted immorally or unethically, uh, and so explaining why the history of the earth is just so barbaric, so red in tooth and claw, suggests that this may be how complexity arises. This is, in essence, what has to be done to create a complex creature like us, an embodied creature. And this is wildly speculative, uh, but for me, this really kind of solves the problem of natural evil, and it actually, for me, is a more powerful view of God, in the sense that the suffering that we've gone through, that culminates in the suffering of Christ, is real suffering, and it has to be acknowledged. And the atonement really is redeeming all of creation, and that all of creation is important and invested in this earth life. So, that's one of the things that has really bothered Christians, and I think has really been a drain in trying to explain. That there was the article by, I think his name was Wesley Wildman, in Dialogue. It was a sermon that he gave that just is full of despair in trying to reconcile a good God who's all powerful, and the natural horror of how messy and wasteful and
I know. Just
and
that raccoon. Like, I don't know.
yeah,
It made me feel just terrible.
exactly.
And it's just I mean, I hate to say just a raccoon, but I mean, on the grand scale of things, it was just a little raccoon.
Yeah.
Well, one resolution that Latter-day Saints might turn to is the idea of intelligent design, and this is sort of a new movement that's grown out of creationism, from what I understand. Uh,
Yeah.
and I know you're not a fan of it, and I know there's some Latter-day Saints who are interested in it, and I was hoping that you could spend a little bit of time sort of describing what the intelligent design movement says, and how the wider scientific community views it.
Yeah. This is a constant bugbear for scientists, and it's especially sort of risen in popularity among Latter-day Saints. I've seen lots of blogs on it, and people sort of saying, "Hey, this is a good idea." And I think its only recommendation is it's got a cool name. I mean, when you look at it and you say intelligent design, yeah, we believe God's intelligent, and yeah, design, we like that.
Yeah,
Intelligent design, that's the way God created. I
it's a
mean,
good name. Yeah,
it is good. I mean,
yeah.
marketing is so important.
Well, we want to see the hand of God in all things, sort of thing, right? I
Right,
mean, we want to see God's hand in creation, but again, then we have to deal with the raccoon problem again, right?
right, right. So in intelligent design, this is a movie pretty much launched by a book by Michael Behe, Darwin's Black Box. And in it, he argued that there are some things that are irreducibly complex, meaning there's no evolutionary story that can construct certain features uh, found in biology, because you need all the parts in place in order for this thing to work. And if it doesn't work, there's no way. Darwinism assumes this sort of selective gradient that each step along the way is better than the thing it just was, and so as selection proceeds, things increase in complexity. And so he came up with this idea of irreducible complexity, that some things are just too complex and there is no evolutionary story.
Yeah, this reminds me. There's a person I know who pointed to the human eye, and he said the way that it sits in the eye socket and the way that that it's lubricated and things like this indicate that there wouldn't be incremental steps towards having an eyeball. Is that sort of what they're saying?
Yeah, and I can't remember if Behe uses that, but he's since backed off, because what's interesting is that we have on Earth right now, every step along the way from very, very primitive eyes, essentially a cluster of cells that are sensitive to light,
Uh huh.
uh, to a human, or even better than human is the octopus eye. The this we've got our optic nerve in front of our light gathering apparatus, so we have a blind spot in
Yeah, it
our
causes
eye.
the blind spot where it goes back through into the skull and stuff, right? Like where all the
Yeah,
nerves go out of the eye.
and so when we're resurrected, I always joke, I hope I get an octopus eye, because they're better. But so we see the whole range there. So that can't be right. We can reconstruct the eye just on creatures that we find on Earth, examples of every stage. And so one of the big pieces of his book was the flagellum in a bacteria. That's the little squiggly tail that they use to swim around
Uh huh.
with. And so he has some elaborate arguments about how that can't have evolved. Well, what's interesting is, because maybe not because of him, but since he's made that argument, there's been work done that shows exactly. We know now how the flagellum evolved. We know each piece of it, and it's been reconstructed both genetically, and the entire scenario of how each of these pieces falls into place has been perfectly worked out. There's no longer any mystery about how flagellum could evolve. And the interesting thing about the intelligent design movement is how disingenuous they are. The Dover judge, this was the trial in Pennsylvania to decide if intelligent design should be taught in the schools, went off in his ruling about how filled with lies and misinformation and misdirection they were. And it's things like this. The story of the flagellum is all worked out. And
And just to give a little bit of more background on that, is you're talking about there was in October 2005 the Kitzmiller versus Dover case. This was
right,
when parents sued the school district because they had introduced intelligent design into biology classes, right?
right, right, exactly. And so Behe was giving a talk just a few years ago that I attended, and he was still giving the flagellum example as if he paid no attention. And this is one of the things that's interesting about them as well, is they're constantly saying scientists have no answer to us. They've ignored us. They paid no attention to us. And what's so funny, though, is science has not ignored them. They have answered them. They have responded. They provide evidence and scientific studies that refute the things that they're saying. But they keep making this claim that, wah, 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 nobody's listening to us. Scientists are hiding this. There was, in fact, a movie I can't remember the name of a few years ago about how intelligent design was not being considered by scientists. And the thing is
Was that the comedian who made that movie? Is that the one?
Yeah. I can't.
What's that guy? The Clear Eyes guy.
Yeah.
Ben Stein.
Yeah. Ben Stein.
Schooled.
Yeah.
Is it Schooled? Something like that.
Schooled or.
Google it, people.
Yeah. Something. But what's so funny is quite literally they do not respond to the scientists. They keep up with their examples that they've pulled up, pretending that science hasn't addressed it, pretending that no one's taking them seriously. And yet in the one of the big philosophy of science journals, they just devoted an entire issue to examining the questions, why it doesn't work, and it comes down to that it's not a science. It's in fact a claim that is non-scientific. The claim is this is irreducibly complex, and by fiat they declare this is too evolved, this is too complex to have evolved. But that's not a scientific position. That's just a position of ignorance. A scientist would make the same claim except couch it as we haven't figured out yet how this has evolved.
Right. It seems to me to be just a maybe somewhat more sophisticated or more recent version of the God of the Gaps idea, which is they do point out questions that linger among evolutionary theorists, and then they say this, and then they say something like, here's an irreducibly complex thing, which we say is irreducibly complex because we personally don't know how to say how it would have evolved.
Right.
And then they say that's God sort of thing. Or they don't want to go that far either. They don't want to say God, right? They say that's been intelligently designed.
Right.
They're careful to make that distinction.
Force.
Right.
And it really is quite silly and really is quite non-scientific. And the interesting thing is they have all kinds of money pouring into the Creation Research Institute, where they that's not the name of it. I'm trying to think of the name of it. But anyway, they have an intelligent design Discovery Institute. That's it. The Discovery Institute has money pouring in. And, if that money was being put into a science, they would be doing scientific work. But as far as I can tell, the Discovery Institute just makes T-shirts and claims and never does any science. And in fact, there is no science coming out of there. They have published in no scientific journals.
Now, they could say that that's because they're discriminated against, right?
Well, they do say that, in fact. And they are discriminated against, but it's because they're not doing good science. I mean, they're not doing any science. I mean,
what would count?
But there's nothing to be done.
What would count? Like, what would count for them to do as far as being considered a science?
Well, and that's what people keep asking, and they don't have an answer. Because, their strategy is to say, well, let's look for this irreducible complexity. Let's find that. And they find it, science addresses it, and they have no response. If they were doing science, the way it would work would be if you take the flagellum example, if they were doing science when this paper came out saying this is how it evolved, their response should have been, okay, you're right, but what about this? Or this is where you're wrong. This is why we don't think you've addressed the question. But they never do. They never respond to the science. They always just come back to claims of it being of there being a conspiracy or there being excluded. But they're just whining because they're not offering any science to be evaluated. They really aren't.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there you have it.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most silly but dangerous ideas around. It's dangerous because they keep making strides in convincing state legislatures, and almost in Utah they did that the idea should be taught in schools, which would be disastrous.
And in Utah, was it struck down then? Did they have any?
Yeah, but it was close. I mean, I think in particular BYU did a really good job of sending people up there to say, hey, we don't want to do this.
See, that's really interesting.
It's
So
a
you're
backdoor creationist attempt to teach their brand of creation in the schools.
So you basically had BYU BYU professors going up to talk to the legislature.
Yeah. I wasn't one of them, but a good number of the biology department went up there to talk and to try to straighten out the misinformation that they received.
Okay, well, before we go, I wanted to kind of just give you the floor for a couple minutes, if you wanted to take a minute to express any thoughts or anything that you had before we close out the podcast. I just wanted to give you open mic and kind of let you go with it.
Yeah. Well, I think the message I would send, if I could get people's attention to realize this, is that science and faith aren't enemies. That the two are perfectly compatible, and that the two are beautiful and magnificent ways of understanding the way the universe works, both from the religious side, our place in it, why we're here, and what matters, and from the science side, the material facts of the universe, how life has evolved, how things have transpired. We're facing a crisis, quite literally, among the youth and among others who look at the statements from the past that suggest that you have to choose between evolution and religion, that the two are incompatible, that there's no way to merge the two. And it's tragic when people are forced to make a decision because mistakes get made. I mean, if you really believe that either the true church is true or evolution is true, but not both, then when you're confronted, you go to another university, you're confronted with the mass of evidence, and you come to think, well, I have to give up reason itself if I'm going to not accept this kind of evidence, and so I have to choose. And the tragedy is the choice never has to be made. The two are perfectly compatible. There are tensions. There are things that need to be worked out. There are challenges to reconciling. Some of our deep doctrines and the scientific story of life on Earth. But that's a challenge. That's not a reason to abandon hope. And so the people who argue that you do have to make a choice, and there are those people that say, if you believe in evolution, if you believe that there was life before there was no death, if you believe there was death before the fall, then you're in apostasy, and you're going to face the consequences of that. That kind of attitude, I think, is harming, in particular, the youth of this generation. And I'd like to see a more compatible rhetoric in the blogosphere and other places where people make these kinds of arguments. So that's my final take.
Do you think seminary students could use some of that too? My feeling is that a lot of youth in the church get these ideas through seminary or institute or Also, some missionaries probably encountered. I encountered it on my mission as well. And that isn't to say that I'm not implicating all seminary institute teachers or all missionaries, but I think those avenues tend to. I don't remember anything like creationism being taught in a Sunday school class, I guess, very, very frequently. And maybe that's because we only talk about the Old Testament once every 4 years. But what's your
Yeah.
what's your thought about that as far as church instruction on that issue?
Well, it's fairly uneven, but I've seen to this day my own kids being introduced to these you know, very evangelical Christian creation ideas. Uh, and I think it's unfortunate. I think it's widespread in seminary in some ways. I mean, I hear this complaint from other science parents. I've run into it myself. There seems to be within church education kind of a culture of this old style creationism, this creationism that kind of crept in from fundamentalist Christianity. And it's unfortunate because I don't think it's part of our doctrines, and yet there is a widespread belief that it is. And it's just unfortunate that kids are exposed to these ideas that I don't think are LDS doctrine, and they're certainly not scientifically accurate or informed or anything. So to the extent that it exists, I think real work needs to be done to get rid of those kinds of attitudes and those perceptions, because it creates a suspicion about science and turns people away from science who might be otherwise interested in it, or turns people away from religion who are interested in science. And that dichotomy just shouldn't exist.
I just now remembering, I wanted to revisit one other point that we talked about earlier in the podcast. Um, we mentioned something about drawing lessons from science or drawing inspiration from science, and which you seemed sort of reluctant about. But I wonder what role science can play in informing faith. And I know sometimes this can take a strange turn. I know there have been people who have proposed things. We talked about the God spot idea, or
Yeah,
a neuroscientist who tried to replicate the feeling of inspiration or something by having a stimulating the brain in certain ways and things like that. So,
right.
or people saying that altruism evolved as a mechanism to enhance reproduction,
Yeah,
fitness, to enhance fitness.
right.
So some people want to draw on evolution to talk about those types of ideas, even the development of morals themselves. But as far as how science can inform faith, because I believe faith can inform science, and we've talked about that. What about science informing faith?
I think it can in a way, because I think that knowledge in itself is one of our values within the church. We talk a lot about gaining knowledge, and we talk a lot about gaining education. And science really is the best way that we have to further our knowledge about the world. And I think the world really is important, understanding the world. We have the scriptures that talk about studying things under the earth and above the earth. And I think that's one of the mandates that God has given us, is to try to understand the world as best we can, given the limitations that we have, given our biases and our tendency to misread. Even so, knowledge is a wondrous thing. In the world of science, I mean, who hasn't watched a documentary of the immensity of space and had kind of a Moses experience of, what is man? What I know I'm nothing now in the face of this, and turning that around and understanding the beauty of the world, understanding the depth of complexity that is the world. It makes us value the world, and I think that perception really is important, and probably we don't want to get into it much, but for me, the ideas of evolution, the ideas of science, teach me about this world that really matters. And I've had this profound experience in recognizing that all of the creatures of this earth have come out through an organic process, that we're all related. We're all part of something big. And what's really cool about Mormon doctrine is that we understand this earth is our final resting place. This is where we're going to stay. This is ours. And this the beauty, the intricacy, the importance of everything that's gone on to get us to this point is there for us to read in the rocks, to read in the cells, and it creates this beautiful perception that being embodied matters, that the things around us matter, that the earth itself matters, and that this is going to be our final resting place. And all these connections are in some sense part of something wondrous. And I can't help but have that feel like it's part of a religious experience to me. The things that I've learned from science have been integrated into my spiritual worldviews. And for me, that's a powerful way that science informs my faith. And I think that nothing damages faith more than ignorance. Conversely, I think that sort of the growing anti-intellectualism, the growing anti-science movements damage faith. They create a very hollow and shallow faith.
Right. I don't know. I personally, and I think this is what you're saying, but I wouldn't necessarily say the problem is ignorance itself, because right, we all have our blind spots, right? But
right.
I think it's the confident ignorance. It's the deliberate or focused denial. It's the purposeful ignorance, I think, that you're talking about.
The suspicion that scientists are in some grand conspiracy, that all opinions are of equal weight. It's almost kind of an insidious relativism that scientists are just doing the same thing that me sitting in my armchair are doing. My opinion's as good as theirs. Or like one friend told me he was down in the desert and he was with another LDS friend, but one not interested in science, or even someone who thinks science is dangerous. And the friend said, I wonder how all these formations got here. And my other friend said, well, geologists say, and the other guy said, geologists. That's just like saying you don't know. So he was about to give a beautiful explanation of where these formations came from, the history of giant lake beds depositing sand in massive river deltas. But no, if a geologist said it, let's go with a different explanation.
Oh man, yeah. Yeah, I think part of the problem with people who are so confident that science disproves religion, or who are so confident that it can't, that they'll completely ignore science, both sort of suffer from the same problem, and that might be just the unwillingness to be unsure. Maybe, I mean,
right.
there's this really interesting quote from an article that I was reading by, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but it's Jeffrey Schloss, and this is really interesting. He said that people need to develop a mature willingness to walk with an epistemic limp, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought that was a really interesting way to put it, that we have a lot of questions, right? I mean,
yeah. And I think that's a really important point. I mean, I do think that we've gotten so used to being sure of ourselves, of having all the answers, that when we don't have an answer, we too quickly want to fill it with the latest, the closest thing we can fill it with, rather than taking the time to try to be comfortable maybe with there isn't an answer yet. We don't know, and that's okay.
Steve, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, I hope it made sense. And
yeah, I hope we both made some sense, hopefully, right? All right, that's Stephen Peck. He's an associate professor of biology at Brigham Young University.